Alrighty, we are back for another episode of the Black Stitch Hockey Cast. Lots of high stakes hockey going on these days. Obviously, we have the IIHF World Championships that wrapped up this afternoon. We have the Stanley Cup playoffs well underway and in full effect. And then on top of that, we have the PWHL finals also running in the background. So quite a bit of hockey. High stakes hockey going on these days. Let me flip my camera. Bear with me all. I'm getting back to being used to the Facebook client after using the clunky, laggy Instagram one for a couple streams in a row. Bear with me. I am in I don't know. I'm a challenged Zoomer sometimes when it comes to technology. Speaking of Zoomers who face a lot of challenges, shout out to quote unquote no name goalie Lucas Dostal on winning a gold medal for the Czech Republic this afternoon, alongside fellow Ducks teammate Radko Gudas, and to Boston Bruins, just because local team, the Black Stitch. I'll be honest, I am not aware of any Flyers or Pens on that roster, but I know Pavel Zacha and David Pastrnak were also a member of that squad. Shout out to them for collecting some hardware. Proud of them. Speaking of players like Dostal and David Pastrnak and Pavel Zacha, speaking of guys who were, mid first round draft picks, got to give a lot of love to Alexander Wenberg for scoring one hell of a clutch goal for the New York Rangers this evening to push them through to a 2-1 series lead. As a Alex Wenberg enthusiast from the moment he was selected in Columbus, seeing his first postseason goal this year, being so critical to the team, you'll love to see it unless you're a Florida Panthers fan, which we know those don't exist outside of the like 2 or 3 that joined circa 2021. If Florida Panthers fans want to fight me in the comments section, that's fine, as long as you click like and share while you're at it and get us some more views. And I'll open the floor up to you guys after that very William Shatner style stop and start opening monologue.
Yeah, I had my own talking points about the IIHF Worlds that I've been chewing on for quite some time, and I had to really just scrutinize Team USA and the USA hockey approach this time around, because it's like, in general, for a long time now, the USA hockey modus operandi has been to treat Worlds as like a showcase for younger talents rather than competitively trying to win, like a lot of the other major nations do, which is a fair model. It's just like they really, set themselves up to just have like a horrible plan all around by having John Hines behind that bench, because you have like Will Smith riding the pine a lot and not seeing time with Ryan Leonard, like even with all the success they've had together, like he never once considered putting them together for even so much as a shift, from what I recall. And it's like, beyond that, you would also, if you're gonna go the we're gonna try to win route, you had a phenomenal roster, and you couldn't even get past the quarters. So it's like really like because of who they had, uh, coaching wise in this particular tournament, like no matter what angle the U.S. tried to approach it from, you can't think of this as anything but a failure for USA hockey.
Yeah, 100%. And, I mean, even Canada coming out of this empty-handed, like, USA hockey failed pretty much all of their modus operandi, and Canada just failed to do anything.
They won a knockout stage game. That's more than we can say.
Yeah, but I mean, the United States is, in my recollection between World Championships and World Juniors, like, the United States in the United States really is truly the Toronto Maple Leafs of international play in recent years, where
We just won the gold at WJC in Sweden this year. What are you talking about?
I just I'm thinking back,
We won
and
it
I'm
two
looking
years
over the last.
ago too, and in 2021. Like,
I'm just sitting here thinking back to them at the World Championships, and I have a strong memory from the 2012 World Championships of them doing what they usually do at the World Championships, and then just fucking up against a
here's
great Finnish
the thing.
team.
Here's the thing: is that with the current trends, with the emphasis of like having like some sort of natural continuity between the U.S. NTDP and further ventures, like you can at least say that the United States has been succeeding in what it's been trying to do for quite some time now. They didn't succeed by any measure this time around. I think it's really, really unique at how bad this particular tournament was in that respect. Because it's like, why even send these guys from the NCAA if they're not going to see meaningful minutes when that's the whole purpose of how that's usually handled? Like, I mean, it's not like they get it right every time. Like, yeah, sure, Gauthier scored 7 goals in the 2023 iteration, but it's like, I mean, it also came at the expense of every part of his game, every other part of his game besides that. So it's just, but even then, it's like you can at least see that you had quality results on a meaningful stage. Whereas I don't think anyone had any player on that team had a meaningful takeaway from this, including and especially the guys that really needed them.
I think the real question is, and it's a tough question, is the United States going to win an IIHF World Championship or another Olympic gold medal first?
Probably the Olympics, because at least we take that seriously from a competitive standpoint.
Like, it's crazy looking that they have not won the IIHF World Championship since 1960.
Well,
That's
technically, for a while, the IAHF Worlds was consolidated with the Olympics, so that it would also include the 1980 gold. Uh, but as a standalone tournament, you have to go back even further than that. But like, I mean, I think if we're reverting to best on best, I think the U.S. is going to be fine because they're going to be able to wheel out their best goaltenders and just have such an overwhelming advantage at that particular position, while also continuously moving in a better direction developmentally to where their top percentile talent is going to be a big threat.
Yeah. I mean, I love Nettie, but Nettie did not have really many strong performances.
I mean, not to double click on something I talked about like over a month ago, but it's crazy how the United States made the same mistake at the World Championships in consecutive years of going from trusting Casey to Smith to win them a medal and seeing how fucking terribly that went, and then watching Alex Nedeljkovic come up short the exact same way the following year.
Yeah.
Especially after my whole narrative about not trusting Nedeljkovic in the postseason, and then here we were in an international do or die competition, and it turned out the same way Pittsburgh's playoff run would have.
Yeah. Yeah.
Love the guy, but
Yeah. No, it's not really like rebuttals. I mean,
Yeah, I'm like, I haven't been right a lot lately, so I need to take the small moral victory on that one while I can.
yeah, I mean, obviously it's not like, Bennington won the gold, for Canada either. So, I mean, but at the end of the day, I mean, it's been obviously the focal point of goaltending. And I mean, obviously Canada's Canada. Their goaltending developing hasn't been great, but even the US, I was kind of surprised that they picked Nettie.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess the biggest surprise for me, the last couple years has been the absence of John Gibson from being looked to on that roster. I mean, I can't imagine that he's particularly interested in being there, but like, it's just kind of wild to me that we haven't seen, yeah, John Gibson on the U.S. team at all recently. Provided that the guy's starting to get some time off in the regular season as Lucas Dostal takes his job one game at a time. But hey, what do I know? Not much. I mean, knowing the politics of USA hockey, it is fairly odd that Joey Daccord and John Gibson were not on that roster starting games.
Yeah.
Like, geez, if you guys are going to lean so heavily into politics, at least like at least be good at politics where somebody benefits from your bad decision making. I don't know. I don't know. You know what else I appreciated today, Damien?
What?
Peak postseason inconsistent Russian goaltending.
Yeah.
Once I saw that 5-4, I said, man, Bobrovsky and Shesty are just they're Mercury in retrograde, man. They're just watching the horoscope signs move and playing in tandem with each other.
The fact that the Rangers scored 2 goals in
Right, I
25
know.
seconds was pretty crazy.
Yeah, I mean nothing really surprise. I mean, I guess the only real surprise is the fact that like Barclay Goodrow has gone on a fucking heater in this series so far.
Well, I
Like,
mean, him and Lafreniere are both great, but I mean, again, it goes back down to depth. And I mean, obviously, you look at Florida. And I mean, obviously, Florida. I mean, I know they're top two. Well, I think line two because that's the one with Reinhardt, Barkov, and whatnot. And I mean, they scored a couple of goals tonight. I mean, obviously, they got a couple of power plays, but I mean, the Rangers' bottom six have been so good this series.
yeah, I mean the Rangers are just yeah, they're a well-built team. They're not overwhelmingly talented 5-on-5. And the thing that gets me, and really with Florida, it comes down to the coaching battle. And, there's a reason that the Hurricanes fired Paul Maurice to bring in Laviolette to win a ring and then went back to Paul Maurice and didn't win a ring. Of just like, Laviolette, despite having a weaker team at 5-on-5, we're starting to see New York run the show at even strength in this series and not need their special teams to be such a factor, which is just remarkable by Laviolette and company to just find a way to somehow close a gap that seemed obvious at the start of the series and then reverse the narrative of what was going to happen in the series.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, what do you feel on the Trouba elbow on Rodriguez?
The thing is, man, you know what we can say about Jacob Trouba? I watched it. I don't really have an opinion on it, other than the fact that I saw Subban calling for the major penalty. I mean, the thing about Jacob Trouba, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think that Jacob Trouba tries very, very hard to play within the confines of the game more often than not. But I will say, if having watched Jacob Trouba play his entire 10-year NHL career at this point, he is constantly playing with a legitimate intent to injure.
Yeah.
Whether or not the hit is clean by the rules of the game, he is perennially playing with an intent to injure, and that elbow is very much an extension of, like, Trouba is dead set to making sure that the other guy doesn't get up after the hit, and it wasn't as, justifiable as some of the big open ice hits he's thrown in recent history.
Yeah.
I mean, just that crazy Seth Rollins type jump from the top rope against Carolina where he went fucking teeth first into the boards trying to charge a guy. Like, yeah. After that, anything Trouba tries to say about his intent is no longer valid.
There's one interesting. So just looking at open ice play and like particularly with the puck and like movement, uh, and like just as particularly in regards to stretch passes and whatnot. Like when you look at the skill level in these series, and sometimes I think it's like despite I think the roster talent maybe having a little bit more of an edge in the West than in the East in this particular round of conference finals. I think it might even be more evident in the ECF that we're like really fortunate that the two-line pass rule doesn't exist anymore because like it would have just absolutely nerfed uh, the quality of play between these teams by such a significant margin, and this is like one of those things that it's true for a lot of these high skill matchups, but like this is one of those things that really exemplifies that. I think, and like I'm really glad that that's gone because like I don't think that we could ever benefit from having things that artificially place a cap on the speed and pace of play, especially like considering like viewership goes up so much and is most enthralled by seeing high skill quality play and quality play go uninhibited. And yet it was hilarious because Kevin Paul Dupont was talking about this and like he's like. Um, and he like jokingly was talking about like I won't say anything about the officiating in this rule. Like people call me out of touch or whatever, but how can they say that when I'm here? It's like frustratingly watching these zebras miss all these two line passes. Like obviously it was like Boomer trying to shit post sort of thing. But like someone genuinely replied, I miss the rule, but I don't miss having to explain it to people. And I'm like, how can you be that much of a fucking insufferable old head that you think that would be a good thing for this game at a fucking league that's continuously growing in offensive skill?
You know what's absolutely asinine about this is I was also in various points of discourse in the last 2 weeks with old head fans talking about how getting rid of the two-line pass ruined the fucking game because it took all the skill out of like strategically playing through the neutral zone. So it's not just one dipshit old head.
No,
There's
I know.
multiple, and it's concerning to me.
I know. It was just like the totality of it being like, you know, someone who like hinges upon like this friggin' like uh guy who's been covering the Bruins for the Globe since long before any of us were born. And like his like religious cult, like actually unironically agreeing with the proposition of this was just made it so much that I was like, this is one of those things that this is such a stereotype that I had to make fun of it to everyone who I know is going to look at this from the same critical lens as myself. And I will probably bring this up on the pod tonight.
I see, Damien, you may or may not also be watching the PWHL game.
I just
You,
like
you
it's
just saw what is probably one of the fucking weakest body checking calls in the history of the sport.
dude. I don't understand. Watching the first period, I'm like, they call a matching minor. roughing between Heisey and I think Brown. I'm like, I'm cool with that. I like it. The rest are not going to be a bunch of fucking pieces of shit like they've been for the last two, both playoff rounds. And I'm like, cool, they're going to let them play. They're not going to call stuff. I'm like, bro, I saw like 3 Boston players get tripped in the first period. Cool. You had that little thing where, Heisey got, taken down after a poke check. They're wrestling, rolling around. It's playoff hockey, baby. Like, that's what it's about. And, I know I'm channeling some of that Dickie V right now, but, like, it's
I
the
mean,
playoffs.
I can't believe they just called that. If she comes through in defensive zone, steps into her while she has possession of the puck, like, like doesn't knock her over, like
Yeah.
I don't fucking understand what the fuck that was from the right. Honestly, I think it's because Kelly Babstock just got the PWHL fined on every major broadcast or regional broadcast network for dropping an F bomb in her intermission interview. Shout out to Kelly Babstock for having you know. I also, credit to Kelly Babstock for dropping the F bomb and the fact that the censors for Nesson and every regional broadcast channel in Canada not expecting a woman to drop an F bomb and not censoring it on time.
Yeah, I mean it's not surprising though. Like I honestly love her energy, and when you look at like her story this year, I don't know if you're like super familiar with her backstory this year, what happened, but basically the beginning of the season, she tried out. She was on New York's tryout team and she got cut, and obviously we saw how New York's season ended up going, and so instead of getting negative, instead of being like, hey, oh, I didn't make it, all this stuff. Instead, she goes and practices and plays hockey in Switzerland for like 2 months. Then when that's over, she comes back. She gets a call from Boston basically being like, hey, we need some reserve players. And she's like, oh, dude, that's awesome. Hell yeah, let's go. And if you look at like a lot of the locker room stuff before some of these games, she is probably one of the biggest fire starters in that locker room, just getting their team going. So like for me, I'm not surprised from that
Yeah, I
interview.
mean, yeah, her freewheeling F bombs in between periods on the broadcast is it's about as surprising as fucking Mario Lemieux ripping darts in the locker room. I mean, you just look at the woman and you know that she's, a great time and a great energy player that, to be fair to a lot of the women's players too, it's not like they've ever had substantial media coverage at any point in their careers prior to this league and this
Yeah.
season. I know all the NWHL and fucking PHF fangirls and fanboys love to talk about the purity of their game like a bunch of fucking yeah. I don't have a noun for them. Fucking gatekeepers is I guess what I'll call them.
I don't
Like when I
know
was
why, but I was like tempted to make like a Cotton Mather reference there. Maybe just
like,
purity made me think Puritan.
all the PHF, NWHL, CWHL gatekeepers like. Bruh, and I was talking to the lead producer for the PWHL last Sunday between the first and second
Yeah.
period, and just talking to her about like you guys have done so much for the league, and people don't realize like how substantial having a legitimate broadcast team in this league has been for this league. I mean,
Oh
like
yeah.
it's unbelievable. Even if the announcers are kind of questionable at times, and I think that there is a somewhat an inadvertent prejudice and borderline racism against European star players in this league since the entire media is former Canadian and U.S. players. It's an unconscious bias. But I
Right.
digress. So I'm not accusing anybody of being a bad person in the PWHL broadcast, but there's definitely some unconscious bias against Euro players. Um, but aside from all of that, like the broadcast team is great, but also like Kelly Babstock, like that's probably maybe one of the first 6 times she's ever been interviewed during a game, tops, and they've all come in the last like month. Like for fuck's sake, and a big criticism somebody had for the league is Reagan Subban's out here doing fucking interviews between periods, and you can't even give a player a fucking towel to wipe the sweat off. Like these are the small nitpicks, but like yeah. And on that note, as I criticize up and coming and developmental things in this league, I kick it over to Liam's developmental league corner.
Yeah. So as of right now, the table at the Memorial Cup has London tops due to their +4 goal differential, thanks to their win 4-0 over the Drummondville Voltigeurs in the round robin yesterday, with Saginaw having defeated Moose Jaw 5-4 in the first matchup. So therefore, placing Saginaw with their +1 in second place. So, it was. We discussed this last night in private circles, but to dangle it out there in front of an audience, it was amusing. Like having Dale Hunter go basically full John Tortorella in his press conference after the game yesterday, where every pundit pretty much agreed that they looked overwhelmingly dominant, but he was like, his assessment basically went along the lines of, I think that going forward with the subsequent matchups, I'd like to see more effort on the back check. Like, it's great that we're doing things to prevent odd man rushes, but what good does it do us if the forwards aren't also getting back there and putting in the work? It's like, and I think Damien had a pretty astute observation with it's like a big part of the reason why London's been just the preeminent CHL dynasty throughout the entire 2000s, more or less, is because of that guy's attention to detail, which most likely serves him well in other areas of his job as well, which is probably why it's been such an attractive locale for prospects. But puck drop will be in a few minutes for Drummondville's matchup against Saginaw, as they have a back-to-back. They had a little more than 24 hours rest, but can't be fun for them to have a second day in a row where they had to face a strong OHL opponent. So, I mean, if they can maintain their strong zone defense that I saw from them at good stretches of the game, which was a decent performance. But as Sylvain Favreau said in his press game conference, a decent performance isn't going to win you a game against a team like the London Knights. And that could be said for Saginaw this year as well. So maybe they'll take a step up, but they're going to have to. There is a little bit of AHL action tonight as well. The Grand Rapids Griffins currently trail the Milwaukee Admirals 0-1. As it stands right now, it is Troy Grosnick rather than Yaroslav Askarov in between the pipes for Milwaukee tonight. He has a 19-save shutout to his name with, let's see. How are you doing, Sebastian Casa? You've got 14 saves on 15 shots. That's pretty good, but hopefully your offense just gets a little bit better at finishing. That series currently stands. Let me take a look at the table one more time. Yeah, so that would be a 2-2 tie right now. So those game fives, they're pretty crucial. Whoever takes this most likely is going to win the series because that's statistically how it goes. So it's, for it to be this much of a nail biter with such low scoring has got to be pretty tense situation for big fans of either team. Over in the BCHL, the Brooks Bandits captured the Alberta Championship, and now we are waiting on the result of the series between the Penticton V's and the Surrey Eagles. Currently, Surrey is up 3-2. With Game 6 tonight, the puck drop is in about half an hour. Whoever wins this series will take home the Fred Page Cup. It's been an interesting season in that independent Junior A league as things have been developing rapidly for them, and their trajectory should be interesting, and the on-ice product has been good too. Should be interesting also to track the NCAA careers of a lot of players in these rosters as well. Probably maybe you'll be hearing a little bit more from me as on them as I was likewise tracking some of the guys from the USHL that are headed in a similar direction, such as Max Swanson, who has probably a very good career ahead of him at the University of North Dakota. Callum Arnett is one player for Penticton who's really been capturing my eyes. Yes, that is Jason Arnett's nephew. He's been on a pretty impressive course. I feel like he has the big game poise and the pedigree to maybe command a potential comeback for Penticton in this series. If anyone can do it, it would probably be him. I know the chips are stacked against him right now, but yeah, I feel like he's the kind of kid who can like turn it around. And yeah, that does it for this week's edition.
Oh yeah. It's funny you talk about Arnett's nephew playing, Tier 1 junior. And I think of Ronick's nephew playing for fucking the New Hampshire Avalanche in the EHL.
Yeah.
I don't really have much more to say. I mean, on that, just thought it was really amusing how that's going.
Yeah. I mean, at least at this point, the thing we can say about the B, like, even with them standing on their own two legs without any support from Hockey Canada now, they are still the preeminent NCAA producer for Canada, even surpassing that of any of the CJHL's constituent leagues, which is pretty impressive. Although it's not terribly surprising, like when looking at Penticton specifically has been doing in that respect. Like we've seen the impact on Hockey East as recently as like these past few years. Bradley Nato, especially being a legend from that league, making an immediate impact from on UMaine and being a one and done. Like, and now with these Alberta cast-offs having joined them, Brooks especially, like they're headed in a good direction, and I wonder what they're going to do with like an increase in third-party revenue.
Yeah. Speaking of third-party revenue, obviously, I think we're all about to be prepared for the major landscape shift on the horizon in the NCAA with the recent court settlement. I know that that's not going to be coming into effect this season, but my God, that's going to be a massive factor for everything in the world of college hockey.
Yeah. At this point, it's interesting. It's been interesting following the dialogue about the potential change on the CHL transfer eligibility policy, because like at this point they don't really have a leg to stand on that topic after that decision was reached. But what's odd is that for the longest time it seems like the resistance that I've gathered from like reading what some of the journalists have been saying on that topic, the biggest resistance actually might not be coming from the NCAA itself to changing that policy, rather than each school's athletic directors aren't very interested in it.
Yeah.
It's like the way I see it personally is like I imagine that the policy is going to be crafted the way it was originally reported, where like you have to have played a minimum number of years or hit a certain age threshold before being eligible, without signing a pro contract to be able to get an NCAA scholarship when coming from the Canadian Hockey League. So the way I see it is the biggest change is that you're really going be only seeing guys who are maybe in like the same tier as like the guys who used up all their USHL or in some cases null eligibility, joining the NCAA, and just seeing like a little bit of like of a fractious nature there, rather than like being overwhelmingly bombarded with blue chips coming from the CHL after only playing 1 or 2 years. Like, it's not gonna play out like that, which is like, that's what the sensationalist take on it seems to be. I'm like, no, there's definitely going to be stopgaps implemented to prevent something like that from occurring. Let's be sensible here.
I mean, I think that combined with the recent settlements that are going to impact the entire collegiate athletic landscape, I am morbidly curious, and I think that if these antitrust lawsuits break the way I think they're going to break with these settlements, I think D3 hockey is probably going to be dead within 10 years. Which combined with the CHL door opening, it's going to be very, very interesting when if we end up in a reality with players, with student athletes unionizing and set compensation salaries for collegiate athletes. I am unbelievably concerned with what this is going to, because like obviously you have schools and it's going to make, the blue blood programs in hockey, I imagine, depending how this shakes out, Denver's going to become even more of a fucking force because they don't really have any other sport that they're like legit, like they're not a high profile major four sports school.
No,
And you
and
look at, yeah.
I was going to mention North Dakota in that respect as well. In fact, that's the only sport that they host there that's actually profitable. Everything else is operating at a loss, which is funny because it's usually like the school's football program brings in the most cash, whereas hockey loses money, whereas North Dakota is literally the opposite of that.
And like, you look at like BU is going to become, like BU is going to be able to put fucking so much into it. Merrimack is probably going to get rid of their football program altogether and just consolidate on their, very talented basketball program and hockey team. Like UMass Lowell's just going to go all in on their hockey team, and then like, it's going to become problematic for BC. And I could reach out to a friend of the program to ask the athletic director how he feels, but I wouldn't be shocked if BC's football program is laid to rest as a result of this, provided, at least they win hockey. At least they're good at hockey. Like, why spend all this money on, like, being a shitty football team? Because you're not going to have, like, they already struggle in football to field anything better than a 5-win team. And if you have to start paying players, you're going to get outpriced by the entire southern part of the, like, does this lead to the death of Boston College football? With any luck, yes.
Yeah, it's like, it is odd. Like, there are some potentialities about where the chips can fall. It's like, I mean, uh, at least the least I can say is like, I'm just like grateful for the fact that the door is open to a reasonable extent, because like I've always said that ever since at minimum NIL has been introduced, there should at least be some sort of CHL to NCAA pathway with some reasonable restrictions in place. And it's like, I'm looking forward to a landscape where that sort of thing can at least be sensibly introduced.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a long time coming. Sorry about that. Some wild PWHL shenanigans just happened. Luckily, Boston is still even at zeros after a very frenetic turn of events. But yeah, I feel like the only sports that, you know, yeah, I we definitely need to see them find a way to incorporate the CHL and NCAA Forbidden Door being open in conjunction with NIL. I mean, luckily the compensation's going to still be stuck in the courts for probably at least another year, but really comes down to the CHL getting their heads out of their fucking asses and
Yeah.
making some notable movement before it becomes,
Yeah, and
yeah.
there's some of the longer term stuff is like uh with respects to how that's going to look in terms of like long term compensational aspects for like sports where especially hockey with like the international imports come into play the most is like that's going to also be another thing where the litigated process probably takes a long time as well because most of those guys are from other countries are here exclusively on student visas. So they're eligible only for passive NIL, which doesn't like necessitate any other like third party dealing. So they can rake in cash from like jersey sales and stuff like that. So in a case like someone like Macklin Celebrini, like if he's selling shirts, he can make money from that. But anything that would involve any like when he when he was at BU, like anything that would have been involved um, that would have involved any sort of like interactions with any external private entities would have been forbidden by the terms of his specific visa, for example. So it's like red tape around that when you're getting into like international contract and like educational law is also because of how like technical that can be. That's going to be something that only stretches out that process even further.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely going to be a wild ride for the next few years, and it really leads to an internal debate that I've started really having with Canada and Canadian hockey is, man, why did they just do such a bad job of developing youth sports? Like
I've always
it,
wondered that too. Like it's it's like with all the grants that system gets and with how much like pride they have in like their like hockey system and just like the sport the culture of the sport itself I've wondered why the athletic scholarships and like potential for development there are not significantly better than it is like it's like with very few exceptions, such as Logan Thompson and Joel Ward, like when you see a guy commit to U Sports after his CHL career is done, it's like, yeah, he's never going to play any meaningful pro minutes. Like those guys, for instance, buck the trend. Like it's not like it never happens, but it's like you can pretty much write them off at that point unless they're like going to go to Europe or whatever.
it's so fascinating. Like, and I think that like beneath the surface, I think the core factor in this is the fact that the United States, in general, is pretty much the only nation that gives any semblance of a fuck about a collegiate level sport. Like
Yeah, at
in
least in a
Europe, we all,
contemporary
yeah,
context.
yeah.
Like it used to be different in the United Kingdom, for instance, but it's like it's definitely like culturally much more ingrained here than it is anywhere else, and it has been for quite some time.
I think if I was to make an educated guess, I feel like the people who run the finance departments of Canadian universities look at the overhead cost of trying to keep up with, what the NCAA programs, spend versus what they make. And I think that they just look at the overhead cost of trying to like chase what they do in the US and balked at it probably 20, 30 years ago of like, the fuck you mean Minnesota and BC are spending this much on their hockey program? That's insane. And now here we are, and it's just like, if U Sports had had the proper planning and funding and development and expansion, like, you could have theoretically had like a fucking a literal international like collegiate, like I think about like the U of Alberta or like Concordia playing against, Michigan or not Michigan, Denver. Like had they properly funded that, could have been a hell of a, event. but instead we're just, pointing and laughing at U Sports.
Yeah, unless you're like Biz or one of his students. Uh, Pretty much. Like, I mean, it's not like, as I've said before, like, it's not like no U Sports team has ever had success against an NCAA D1 program. Like, I've like, there's documentation of in like the last like 20 years, like the it's St. Francis Xavier X-Men defeated UNH, like think like 3-2 in OT back in like '06 or so. But it's like definitely there's enough of a sample size where we can say that that's very much the exception, not the rule. But like I was thinking about this too. I think one thing I read about the dialogue about like the cost versus uh, return sort of thing for athletics. From what I understand, a big part of that is like, oh wait, you know what? It's more beneficial for our books to overall to just continue to take the loss on this program. Whereas like within like the context of finances within like Canada's economy, there might not be the same incentive for that. That might be another factor because I mean, their structure when it comes to tax laws and all of that is vastly different from ours.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Man. So what is everybody feeling in the Western Conference playoff right now, What are we feeling in the Dallas Edmonton series, We'll call it the Bill Guerin, Jason Arnott Bowl.
It's funny because like I was like when we talked about American goaltending, it was tempting to like transition that into like a Jay Gettinger reference. Like, man, like he just you know he just looks like a friggin' like respawn of like friggin' Patrick Waugh when he is on his game and making those saves, and it's just like he's even with like their roster depth, like he's just so invaluable when he forms that backbone. And like last night really, really demonstrated that as a reminder. And it's funny because like in those early phases, I was like, I was a little bit concerned, like, oh, Connor Brown scored a goal, we're fucked. Like they are screwed. Like, and to his credit, like, yeah, it was he picking up the garbage, but he did also have a pretty good feint on that goal. But it's like, but after that, like, it was a tight game, and like, basically, like, Edinger gave them everything they possibly could to win, which they did eventually seize, which is something that Edmonton just does not have as an option. And I think that's a big difference maker in this.
Absolutely. Also, props to Ettinger for taking over the most wins in playoff franchise history for the Dallas Stars, allegedly.
Mm,
I saw that stat this morning. Wasn't entirely sure about the accuracy behind it based on Ed Balfour.
right.
But the one thing I did take out of that is he did pass Marty Turco, which to me really spoke volumes to like the dichotomy of how bad the Stars were while simultaneously being so good while they had Marty Turco. Because I think of that series between him and Luongo in 2006, 2007, where they were both basically a sub-1 GAA for most of the series with the most ridiculous save percentages you've ever fucking seen in your life between them. And then you realize in 4 playoff runs, like, he only picked up 21 wins, and in 2 playoff runs got 1 win apiece in 5-game exits. So, like, really just insane how good Turco was and how, bad the team in front of him was, which brings me back to a discourse I was a part of about, um, subpar teams with elite goaltenders are fucking themselves out of rings because they don't have the offensive ability to get to the next level Um, and man, I never really think about the Marty Turco Stars as one of those teams, but man, we're the Marty Turco Stars, the Jeremy Swayman Bruins of their era.
I could see it.
Aging Modano. In hindsight, the more I think, aging Modano, like Steve Ott.
Leighton.
Nah, man, Leighton, I think, was already. I'm talking like 2004 to 2009 Dallas.
Leighton was still in. I don't think he retired till like '08 maybe, because that's when
I mean,
you had Morrow
he,
kind of aging a little bit. I mean, he was
I mean,
aging. Look at
I mean,
guys.
it's not even that Morrow was aging. It's just Brendan Morrow was never.
Yeah,
It's, Brendan Morrow's a weird player in the sense that like Brendan Morrow's a guy that a lot of people talked about, and I'm not sure he was ever
He
really
was
that good.
he was a stat compiler. I feel like he was kind of cut from like the Dave Andrechuk, Rod Brindamore class, but maybe not even like in the same tier as those guys.
I mean, his career high in points was 61 or 65, pardon me. And like, I mean, Brendan Morrow, and it's probably because he was a 100 plus PIM, 40 plus point guy that the old head Eric Cherry type hockey fans started to build a narrative that Brendan Morrow, kind of like Ryan Callahan, was a better player than he actually was.
yeah.
Speaking of, the Heinrich Lundqvist Rangers, who I think fall into the same category as the Marty Turco Stars.
I'm seeing 74 as his career high point total.
70.
Yeah, because
I might be dyslexic.
I was like looking for like kind of an outlier in goals scored because like usually there are those guys.
Yeah.
Guys from like his profile kind of have like that season where they have like a decent like goal scoring explosion that pop out. But yeah, it was the 07-08 campaign where he also had a pretty good playoff outing of 15 points in 18 games. But it's like, man, I knew he was under a PPG for his career, but it was a little lower than I thought with 575 and 991 overall. Like, so yeah, I think he definitely had people like cut from that like lowbrow analytical cloth, probably gaslighting us into thinking he was like a fringe star based at like at minimum.
Yeah.
I just like, but you know, it's funny to say because like he did get a bad rap, but like when looking at his playing career, you could say like someone like Dale Hunter is the archetype of offensive skill with like being like just an absolute nuisance taken to like a max. Like as we were reflecting last night, that dude had friggin' he's the only guy in NHL history to have 3,000 plus PIMs and 1,000 plus points in his career. Like he was legit, and then on top of like having this fantastic coaching and dev career. Like, man, what a legend that people will probably always hate to admit when considering his hated status as both a player and a coach by everyone who hasn't rooted for him, basically.
Yeah, he was a great player
Yeah,
though.
he was.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just like
I needed to echo your sentiments on Dale Hunter there.
it's just man, and it's funny because like the funny thing about his like playing resume is like he's one of those guys who people like to glorify the high PIM plus high points, and even though he like profile overall, and even though he's a guy who had nearly 700 assists in his career, on top of having that unique marker, he's never really someone people like talk about as being one of the greats in that respect. I feel like, which is like baffling to me because like no one can fit that description more probably.
Yeah. Speaking of guys from that era who were, man, one guy from that era, and I wish there was more conversation about what really derailed his career, because I'm not going to, use hearsay that we all know, man. Jason Allison's one of those guys from that era where, like, if his pre-game and post-game antics. Like, I do kind of wonder what the fuck the Bruins front office was thinking when they didn't want, like, looking back on the early 2000s Bruins front office, like, had they had Jason Allison available as their 2C behind Thornton when Thornton finally, like, figured it out the year, like, it's one of those what ifs had the Bruins actually, like, I don't know, done, like, Jason Allison fucking Joe Thornton tandem could have been special when, Thornton was actually, like, going into his prime.
Yeah, I always think about like the 02-03 season specifically, where like he was still very young and had a season that, adjusted for era now, would equate to 120 points, with Glenn Murray as the next highest scorer, with like a pretty decent gap between them. Although like he was also within the top 10 that year, from what I recall. It's like, man, and it's just that era would have been different. I mean, it doesn't help that like the defensive core was structured about as poorly as it could be as well. But like the biggest just thing that year, it was like he was like he was absolutely stymied against the neutral zone trap in round one, and it's like if you had like the thing that was interesting about Allison was like he was kind of hard to counter in the respect that he was not a fast skater, but like he was just, once he got below the dots, like you couldn't stop him, and it's like, and he was just had such phenomenal contact balance that like a guy like that, structuring a line around him in your top six, like adds a lot of versatility to the offense, to where like that's a lot more difficult to counter.
Yeah. Well, I think about that LA line too. I mean, with him with Deadmarsh and Palffy on his wings, like, it was nasty.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously they're all kind of older, but
Yeah, but I mean, Palffy was still a fucking point per game player with that configuration, and I'm looking at that in like Allison's injury shortened year. I mean, Palffy and Deadmarsh were so in. I mean, you think about the Yaroslav Modry still being 40+ point guy for those Kings teams with aging Matthew Schneider. Like, how the fuck were the 01-02 Kings just like? Like, it's amazing how bad Boston was, and to this day, kind of still is at putting together, a cognizant, cohesive top, defensive core that can move the fucking puck and take some pressure off their forwards. Like, it's absolutely fucking baffling to me that, like, how the fuck that 2011 Bruins team, like, did what they did. Like, and I know, like, Chara, had enough offensive upside, not an overwhelming amount of offensive upside, but nevertheless enough offensive upside that they were able to, finish what they started. But like, what a bizarre roster construction for that group. And, what's never really talked about by Bruins fans, and I find it very peculiar, is how people don't really talk about how valuable Tomasz Kaberle was for that group. Like, Bruins fans forget he was on the fucking team, and it's like he had 11 assists in the playoffs playing 16 minutes a night, which is, like, when you're talking about a guy getting bottom four deployment who's, matching Seidenberg's output playing on a pairing with Chara, like...
Yeah. Well, I mean, they were in greats even while it was happening, because the whole time they said he sucked.
Like, Tomasz Kaberle is one of the more underrated defensemen of that era, unless, one time in my life I'm going to give Leafs fans credit. Leafs fans knew what they had in Tomasz Kaberle. I mean, him and Dmitry Yushkevich was one of the most effective defensive pairings of their era. Like, Yushkevich had the offensive upside of a fucking pet rock, but, like, that dude was unbelievable in his own zone. And, Kaberle is just one of the most underrated defensemen really, probably of all time, but we can leave it at of his era.
I like how this started with us coming full circle too, because Jason Allison was a London Knights alumnus. So
And unlike Tomas Cabrera, he finished his career in Toronto. And, Cabrera obviously had the best years of his career in Toronto. Obviously, he started his career in Philadelphia. But
yeah,
nevertheless,
so this was like if
my
you
bad. Yashkevich started in Philadelphia.
yeah,
It's on me.
I was gonna say, I was like, but like, you know what? It's funny because like there's always that speculation from Toronto fans about like what pending free agents from Ontario might actually come home. But like, with there being like a surplus, like realistically, do you think any of those high end ones that are hitting the market soon might sign there?
I missed the first part of that question. I just spaced out hard. I am so sorry.
Uh, Let me pull up a list. Let's see. I just saw this, uh, and hopefully, like, we don't stretch this out too much because I imagine you probably want to hit the big finish relatively soon. Uh, let's see. I can't find it immediately, but like there are a fair number of guys like who are from Ontario that are hitting the free agent market soon, as you're likely aware. Like, do you see any like homecomings imminent for Leafs fans? That like they're always like telling us are likely to occur because there are a fair
I,
number of options to where it could reasonably happen.
I, I think there's some plausibility to some of them. The problem is for the Leafs, like I'm cautiously optimistic that Treliving is going to just, you know, be smart. Like in reality, the only person the only two players that are actively free agents that I think should be in Toronto next season, emphasis on should be,
Right.
are, I think Max Domi needs to be back. I think Max Domi was a huge part of that team, and I think Max Domi being a middle six player for them moving forward is a right choice. But I mean, Lakeville, Minnesota native. I mean, Brady Shea is the only other free agent that I know is out there that is is somebody that the Leafs should pay money to. And then the rest of that team should be, you don't trade Marner. You don't fucking trade Marner. I can't stress that enough. You will never get back what you're giving up if you trade a star player. We've all talked about that outside of the pod pretty consistently in the past. But like, you just you go in on Matty Nyes, you go in on Easton Cowan, you put Cowan out there with Marner and Matthews, you put Nyes out there with Tavares and Nylander. You run that shit back, and then you build a bottom six around Nylander and Engvall, and then you re-up your blue line with fucking Morgan Riley and Brady Shea. And I look at that group, I look at those names, and I say, yeah, Toronto can actually take another run, and as long as they don't play the Bruins in the first round, they might do something.
Yeah,
But
pretty much.
for the Leafs fans, will dangle it out there unless you can get Steven Stamkos for like $3 million a year, but that's not going to happen.
Yeah, his name was like one I was like I saw and I saw that and I also saw Adam Henrique as like two like hopefuls, not necessarily both of them, but just names that had been like floated around. I was like, yeah, good luck.
I really think that Rico is going to retire. I'd be really surprised if he doesn't, especially if Edmonton wins the cup. Or,
Uh,
Rico could just come home to Anaheim. And on that note, we can roll into a nice big old finish.
yeah, so first off, I want to put out a quick correction to myself. It was just 2021 and 2024 that Team USA captured the WJC. 2022, of course, was the Canada class that included very good team performance, but also was one of those things that seemed to tarnish Shane Wright's image in the greater scouting community, as I recall. Then, of course, 2023 was the year of Bedard's wizardry, but I'm only bringing that up to denote that was part of their back-to-back. Obviously, that wasn't brought into the discussion, but just for the sake of completionism, I suppose. But my actual talking point this week is, look, I'm not even a Canes fan, but Don Waddell, I have no fucking respect for you whatsoever for the means that just the things just ended. It's fine if you wanted to pursue a gig, but the last gig elsewhere, and also like look for a positioning where you don't have to answer to anybody. But the last thing you did really was potentially tarnish the image that the Carolina Hurricanes organization has with Scott St. Petersburg in your fucking unwieldy, dumbass comments about how you were handling the Alexander Nikishin ordeal. Like, we're doing everything we can to get this player out of Russia. Like, not verbatim, but almost exactly what he said. It's like, okay, first of all, what? Like, the guy is, like, being held in a cell? Like, this is something you have to break him out of? That sounds stupid. Beyond that, you're basically committing a de facto version of tampering, which is probably the means by which is probably accounts for the means that Roman Rotenberg replied to that comment. So it's like, with this, just in the interest of good management, I'm gonna say, keep it plain and simple. Fuck you, Don Waddell. I am rooting against you now for the rest of your fucking career because that was pretty fucking stupid. And Eric Tulsky, I'm very excited for you because, yes, I understand you have a Harvard degree and you're a genuinely intelligent, brilliant person, especially when it comes to analytics. But it's been remarkable. It is pretty remarkable to see an ascendancy, especially from a guy who was part of the Broad Street hockey team, from hockey blogger to interim general manager. But God, you have an uphill battle ahead of you now because of your fucking predecessor, man.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's not even accounting for the Jesperi Kotkaniemi contract.
There is just
There you
that
go.
whole situation that they've got to navigate with their free agency situations is not great. I just don't want to. I would not be thrilled about inheriting things, but hey, he'll probably be better at drafting than he was.
Yeah, so I mean, I want to hit on two things. First of all, I've liked how the PWHL Boston responded in tonight's game. I think they've played better puck support, spacing's been better. It's still kind of crazy that everybody's surprised with how Boston's playing, and I'm like, bro, if you did watch like the first round of the playoffs and even the first game of the series, you'd see it. I feel like if Boston does win, it's gonna be Gigi Marvin. She's already got 3 shots. She's only been on the ice for like 5.5, so she's got that shoot first mentality, which I love. It's what wins games. But the other thing, again, going back with the IIHF, with the Penguins, I don't really talk about the Penguins much. But I did want to obviously say, like, congratulate Pedersen for, I mean, he had 6 points. Carlson had 11 points. So, I mean, it's kind of nice to see that as a Pittsburgh Penguins fan, seeing, arguably their 2 best defensemen, having a pretty good tournament. So, kudos to those guys.
Yeah, I don't really have a whole lot to go off of this week due to just things I've been focused on, but just really want to double click on some, really irritation going on with Ducks fans. As the draft approaches, you have the third overall pick, if you don't trade that pick, you're taking either Celebrini, Demidov, or Levshinov, and there really shouldn't be any fucking discussion about anybody else. I know people like the fact that Lindstrom's big, but man, if the Ducks take Silyev at 3 with Levshinov and Demidov on the board, like, Pat Verbeek, please just step off the fucking roof of the Las Vegas Sphere. Like, don't draft Griffin Reinhardt Jr. Just don't do it. And I'm gonna complain about this until the draft comes and goes. And if we do a live stream of the first round of the draft this year, and the Ducks do take Silyev, just be prepared for me to exit the screen potentially in a cop car.
You almost made the same slip up I made a couple weeks back when I called him Artur because I was reading about Artur Stonehands Taya Newland right before the pod started. Man, what a weird player. Phenomenal chemistry with basically Nikita Kucherov's respawn in the form of Matvei Michkov, but hands of fucking stone. Like, goddamn. But yeah, I definitely hear you there. Although I'll give credit to Lindstrom is like he has a narrow path, but he knows how to walk it rather than trying to be something he's not. But there's some interchangeability, a fair amount even after Celebrini in this class. But I definitely like can like understand like the apprehensions of like leaving things on the table with uh, a lot of these bigger dudes in exchange for some of the skill that's out there. Yeah. Yeah, that was a pretty solid bit of discourse this week. We'll continue to monitor these high activity, levels that are still going on even at this time of the year with a lot at stake across multiple leagues. You can expect consistent CHL output from me as long as the Memorial Cup is going on. Maybe some evaluations of who my favorite North American skaters have been across the different leagues I've tracked. And there'll be plenty more of that in the coming weeks. We'll see you again at the same time, the same day next week, everybody. Take care.